everybody, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I'm going to be recommending you 5 fantasy romance books perfect for spooky season. So this one is going to be a little bit different from my previous fantasy romance recommendations videos, as usually I don't repeat recommendations, but today we are specifically looking for fantasy romance books with a really good atmosphere and also some spooky vibes. So there is one book in this video that I have mentioned in a previous fantasy romance recommendations video, and also I typically only recommend books that I've given 4 and 5 stars to, but with this video we are looking for the atmosphere and the spooky factor above kind of anything else. So there are 2 books in this video that I've given 3 stars to, so I did enjoy them, they were good, but they're by no means a new favorite or anything like that. So getting straight into the recommendations, I'm going to be kicking it off with a new favorite book of mine. If you take one recommendation from this video, I want it to be this book. This book pretty much inspired this video, made this video possible, and it is a perfect spooky season read, and that is Her Soul to Take by Harley LaRue. So this one is, I would say it's fantasy romance as opposed to paranormal, because the creatures that we're dealing with here are gods and demons, but it is the first book in a trilogy. Each book follows a different demon and like a romance with a different demon. In the first book we are following a woman called Ray, who is from this town that is very reminiscent of like Forks from Twilight, and also wherever the hell the girl Nora lives in Hush Hush by Becca Fitzpatrick. And the setting has all of those like nostalgic paranormal romance vibes that I loved from the books that I was obsessed with in like 2010, but it is an adult book. It is very, very smutty, but if you were a fan of like those paranormal romances when you were younger, I feel like you will also get those same nostalgic vibes when you pick up this book. But we're following Ray, who's moving to this Northern American town that her family are actually from, and she has a YouTube channel where she posts like paranormal investigations. Her channel's going a little bit stale, and she ends up with this grimoire that's ended up in her possession. She's not really sure how, but she's decided to get more views on her channel that she's going to summon a demon. Now she thinks that this isn't actually going to be a thing, it's not really going to happen, and she ends up summoning Leon. Up until recently, Leon has been in service to this rich family in the town who have been using Leon to help them get sacrifices to feed to a slumbering god underneath the town. Leon doesn't want to, he hates them, but they had his grimoire up until recently. So when he finds out Ray has it, he asks for it back so that he can have his freedom, only to find out that it has been stolen. So the main kind of plot of this is that Ray and Leon are trying to find the grimoire so that he can have his freedom, and also so that they can put a stop to the rich family that are sacrificing people to the god underneath the town. This comes with a whole list of content warnings, and also it has a kink list. It is a kinky romance. It's definitely smutty, explicit sexual content in this one. It was really hot, I have to say. It has like edge play, spanking, BDSM, like domination kind of vibes to it. If you do head to the Goodreads page, there is a full list of the kinks and the content warnings in this one. So if this is not the kind of book that you are used to, would recommend maybe going checking out that list just to see if this one is for you. But I was a little bit nervous going into this based on the list of kinks that were provided, because I was very much like scared that it was going to be like Den of Vipers, which is a book that I really didn't like. I thought it was very, very boring, but this was so good. It had the atmosphere, like I said, of all of the things that I loved in 2010, with a main character who surprisingly did not have a whole ton of dumb bitch energy, which is something that I sadly come to expect from books like this sometimes. It had a really good romance that was believable with really good smut and a decent plot that held it together. Like I said, if you were a fan of something like the Hush Hush series by Becca Fitzpatrick way back when it was released, I feel like this would be a good book for you now as an adult, as it has a lot of similar vibes but is like leveled up. The other 5-star read I have to recommend to you guys is the X Hex by Erin Sterling, and this one is a little bit different to my typical fantasy romance recommendations, as this is one traditionally published, but it is also very much in line with like a standard contemporary romance, but with a witchy backdrop. So it's kind of like a contemporary romance set in Halloween Town. So this one is set in a town called Grace Glen, and it is following Vivian, who is a witch. I think it's something like 10 years prior to the start of this book. She had this like whirlwind summer romance with this really hot guy who's actually related to the founders of the town, but he eventually left to go back home and broke her heart. So when she's drunk one night with her, I think it's her cousin, she curses him with the Bath and Body Works candle. scandal. Because she is an actual witch, she doesn't consider what she's done to be real witchcraft, and nothing really happens, so she thinks nothing of it, up until Reese, the guy who she had this fling with, comes back in the present day to recharge the ley lines that are under this town, and everything starts to go terribly wrong. All of the magic is just going awry, and Vivian realizes that her curse may have worked a little better than she expected it to. So I gave this 5 stars, not because it's anything groundbreaking, but because it did everything that I expected it to. It's pretty much what it says on the tin. It is a very light, very fun rom-com kind of story with a sprinkling of magic in there that made me laugh and delivered all of those like cutesy fun vibes that I want from like just your typical standard romance. I would generally recommend this to people who don't typically read fantasy romance because the fantastical element in here is nothing too heavy. It's very light, really easy to wrap your head around, and it doesn't actually play a huge part in the story aside from to provide a little bit of a plot in here outside of the typical angst of a romance, and just make the story a whole lot more fun. So if you're looking to pick up something maybe outside of your comfort zone, something a little bit fantastical because it's spooky season, Halloween, then I think the X Hex may be one that you really enjoy. The only one that I've talked about in a previous fantasy romance recommendations video is Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerry Maniscalco, and this one is also the only young adult book on this list, although I do have it on good authority that the second and third books in this series are aged up a little bit and they are classed as new adult. So this one is set in a medieval Sicily, and it is following Amelia, who is from a family of witches. Her family own a trattoria, and they use very small magic, I want to say. They put it into their food and things like that. But one day Amelia's twin sister Vittoria is brutally murdered, and Amelia is desperate to get to the bottom of what happened to her sister. So she starts to dabble in dark magics and accidentally summons one of the princes of hell, Wrath, who has to go along with Amelia's investigation to earn his freedom. So I have to say I was torn on this one when I read it. The first 40% of it wasn't really doing it for me. It felt just like a very typical standard young adult fantasy. It was decent. The description of food in here is unparalleled, and it really made me want to go back to Rome because I know how good Italian food is. But aside from that, it was doing nothing outstanding. It was just fine. And then suddenly when I got to the 40% mark, I was so much more invested in this story. I think that there is like decent sexual tension, though there's nothing really extreme going on in here because it is young adult. And the end of this took the plot to a place that I wasn't expecting it to go, and I still have not continued on with the sequel, but I very desperately need to because I was shook. The last like 30 pages of this I feel like did a 180 in a way that did confuse me a little, but not in a way where I thought worse of the book because of it. It was more of a way where I was desperate to continue, and I was 10,000 times more interested in it because of the direction that Kerry Maniscalco decided to take this book in. Once again, if you're pretty new to fantasy romance, if you come from like a background of like young adult fantasy and you've never really dipped your toes into fantasy romance, then Kingdom of the Wicked might be a good one for you to start off with. And now for the 2 3-stars, which are actually both vampire books. The first one is Black Sunshine by Karina Halley. This one is the first book in the Dark Eyes duology, and I have to say a lot of people really love this book. I just didn't. I thought it was okay. So if you read this, there is a high chance that you are more likely to enjoy it than me because I seem to be the odd one out here. This one is contemporary fantasy or like paranormal. It's set in the real world, but we are following a young woman called Lenore who is kidnapped by a vampire called Absalon on her 21st birthday. She's lived a normal life in the normal world, knows nothing about vampires until this guy kidnaps her and she discovers that she is also a vampire. When she was a baby, her parents, who are actually witches, went to the home of her birth parents and murdered them and kidnapped Lenore and raised her without knowing anything about witches or vampires. So she's kidnapped by this guy called Absalon, and she starts to discover that her parents have lied to her. She doesn't know who to trust, and she's growing closer and closer to this dark, brooding, mysterious vampire. Now, the reason why I didn't like this is that it has a very different vampire lore to what is typical. Like, you know, the very common vampire lore, like garlic and crosses repels them, can't go out in the sun, like you're not born a vampire, you're a person until you're turned into a vampire. It very much diverged from that very typical lore, but didn't explain what the vampire lore in this book was very well, which was my main criticism of it, because while I was interested in the fact that this was a different vampire lore than I was used to, I don't feel like it was ever explained, and it it kind of, a lot of this went with the assumption that we knew what kind of vampires these were without ever telling us. I also didn't really feel a sexual tension between the main character and the big scary vampire guy, and this had pretty much no plot at all until we got to the very end, where there was a little hint of something to come in the sequel, which I still haven't read. Overall, it was good. It was pretty enjoyable. I don't want to put you guys off it by saying like I've done all of the things that I didn't like about it. I did like the main character for the most part in this. She was like a decent main character to follow, but like I said, a lot of people really love this one. I didn't, just thought it was okay, but if you pick it up then you probably stand a good chance of enjoying it more than me. And the final one comes with a caveat. This was like a 3.5 4-star read for me, and that is Charlie Travesty by Jessie Elliott and KJ Sutton. I was torn about whether to recommend this one. I needed one more book for this video, and I did really enjoy this one. I felt like it should be here because it's a vampire story, but it is unfinished and it is never going to be finished. So this was published as a serial. So this bind up has the first 4 parts, which is A Whisper in the Dark, A Light in the Dusk, A Memory in the Flame, A Sacrifice in the Smoke. The author started writing the 2nd volume, which had 4 new installments in it, but it is unfinished and it is never to be finished. I really enjoyed this first installment, so if you want to go ahead and read this and have like a good time with it, then you can, but just know that if you move on to the 2nd volume, which I didn't because I was waiting for the full thing to come out, it is going to end just like really abruptly and never be finished. This one follows a young vampire princess called Charlie Travesty who is approaching her awakening. The awakening happens sometime around a vampire's 23rd birthday, and essentially you will wake up and your eyes will have changed colour, you'll have come into full maturity, and the colour of your eyes denotes what sector of the city you are then allowed to live in and what your purpose for your life essentially is going to be. So the main character is approaching her awakening, it happens, and her eyes turn out to be a very different colour than she expected them to be, and she is banished to a sector of the city that kind of like focuses on menial labour and has a lot of humans in it. There is a love triangle in this series. There is, I can't remember what the guy is that I don't really care about. Is he called Drew or something? Yeah, Drew. So you have your typical like golden retriever Labrador soft boy, which is Drew, and then you have the big bad vampire guy called Noah, who's really hot. Things kind of heat up in here as well because there's a string of murders going on. I think that they're happening in the tunnels underneath the city. So Charlie Travesty is partnered up with the bounty hunter who's Noah to figure out what's happening to the people. So we have some romance. It is a smutty one. There is a blood drinking scene in here from a unconventional location, shall we say. We have the murder mystery as well and the love triangle to keep things a bit spicy. It wasn't the best thing that I ever read, but it was a very good time. Lots of shock factor, lots of cliffhangers. Both of these guys I guess have their own merits, though I'm definitely a Noah gal. And yeah, it was predominantly just a good time and entertaining read, but do, like I said, be warned that if you do decide to pick this one up, it is unfinished. I was torn about whether I should recommend it, but at the end of the day, it's entertaining. I enjoyed it. It fits the brief. It's just sad that we'll never get a conclusion to this story. So there you have it. Those are 5 fantasy romance recommendations perfect for spooky season. Please let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them. Also, feel free to give me recommendations for fantasy romances that you guys think are perfect for spooky season. I'm hoping for myself this October to be continuing on with the Souls trilogy by Harley LaRue as a priority, because the next installment is featuring Zane, who I'm really excited to read more about. I don't think anything can top Leon personally, but I have heard that the sequel, which is called Her Soul for Revenge, is better, so we'll see. I don't believe the hype, but we'll see. So yeah, please let me know if there's any particularly good spooky themed fantasy romances that you guys have read. Aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.